She's a Canadian coming to a rowing nation of Norway. We kind of praise the rowers of this world. She's a 3-time Olympian. She has a silver medal at rowing at Summer Olympics in London. And she is also sitting, that's why she's here. She's not going to teach us to row. Well, I wouldn't need that. But she's at the WADA's Athlete Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, Andréanne Morin.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, dear participants. Thank you, Jan. Slight correction, I'm no longer on the Athletes Commission for WADA, but I now co-chair the Anti-Doping Charter of Athlete Rights with my colleague Becky Scott, who is the chair. And this, let me figure out this clicker here. This past June in Canada, we had in Calgary on June 4th and 5th, we had the first WADA Global Forum, Athlete Forum, and we gathered as many athletes as we could. We invited every NOC, National Olympic Committee, International Federation, and Anti-Doping Agency to send us one representative, athlete representative, to attend. And this was very much of my colleague Becky Scott's vision. Back in March of 2017, at the WADA Symposium in Lausanne, we had an outpouring of support from athletes worldwide following the investigations in Russia on state-sponsored doping. And we thought we really need to carry this momentum, carry the athlete voice, and let's have a discussion and see what we can do. So this first forum was co-hosted by the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. Here is the picture on the final day. There were 104 participants, 61 males, 43 females, and the slogan of the conference as a whole was the sport we want. And so what is it that we athletes really would like to see? The breakdown, good representation. There's always room for improvement, but we had 14 from Africa, 13 from Asia, 6 from Oceania, 37 from Europe, and 34 from the Americas. And we had, the format was, there were several presentations, but there were also roundtable discussions. So several of the participants were able to share their views, what's happening in their corner of the world and in their federations. So this is of course too small to see, but just to give you an overview of the agenda that we built, our primary goal was to address the athlete concerns and the questions that they had, and make them leave the forum feeling very empowered. And so we called on world-renowned speakers, the people that are in this room, the change agents, those that have been so inspirational to all of us. And so we had Gunter, that is the chief investigator for WADA, come and speak to us and what he's done. We had the Stepanovs, who spoke to us via Skype on a video conference of their courage and their bravery and what they did. We had both Richard McLaren and Richard Pound, authors of the independent reports for WADA, and several athlete leaders. A few, just to name a few, there was Paula Radcliffe, there was Claudia Bokel, and there was Silke Kasner, who has been the voice behind the German Athletes Commission, challenging the IOC Rule 40 and trying to demand that the IOC redistribute 25% of its profit from marketing and transmission of revenues from the IOC to the athletes and 10% to WADA. And then on day 2 of the forum, there was a significant amount of time that was spent on the charter, which is a project that Becky and I have put together. And that is we gave an overview of the current charter as it is. It's still in draft form, but we were able to get some comments and feedback from the athletes in the room. Now on to the outcomes. You can read them up here. They're all here, verbatim, but I'll just try to provide a little color to the conversations. So as I discussed, the Anti-Doping Charter of Athlete Rights is probably the biggest projects we have going forward, and we want to stress the importance of the charter and ensure that the rights of all the athletes are accepted, and most importantly, that they are integrated into the World Anti-Doping Code in 2021. A second outcome, or I should say, throughout the forum, we had polling stations that were done via the mobile apps. And so we were able to get a lot of comments from the athletes. And one question that we asked the athletes was, what were their top concerns relating to anti-doping, to the anti-doping system as it currently is? And the three concerns that came up are the same that we've been discussing here already this morning, which is corruption, conflict of interest, and lack of independence. So the athletes are very aware that that is what is troubling the anti-doping movement. And as the Athletes Commission, or Athletes Committee for WADA, we're going to help address those concerns going forward and increasing and keep supporting WADA in that effort. We spoke earlier about the RUSADA roadmap to compliance. That is a very large concern for the athletes and those at the forum. Primarily, there are two of them that are still outstanding. The acknowledgement of the independent report and the access to the Moscow labs with the samples and data that are still stored there. And so the forum, or the athletes generally, would support WADA in their decision to ensure that those items remain and that they are fulfilled before the World Anti-Doping Code compliance is declared. As I mentioned earlier, the athletes were immensely thankful for their Stepanovs and the contribution they've done to the fight against doping. We were able to get their opinion firsthand, and we thank them for their courage and their brave actions. On to the CRC. We spoke a lot about the Speak Up program, the whistleblower program, and the forum was very much in support of that program and also of the new international standard for code compliance by signatories and the work that the CRC has been doing. Throughout the forum, we had several speakers talk about the evolution of the athlete voice and how we've gained a whole lot of momentum going forward, but there's still more to be done. And so collectively, athletes were very clear that we need to keep going with that voice, and we need to make sure that the leaders of sport and the governments are able to foster and facilitate an environment in which the athletes can express their true opinions without fear of retribution. The opening remarks were done by Olivier Nigli and Sir President Craig Reedy, and they discussed WADA's budget and its limited resources. And this isn't a novel outcome, but I think the athletes generally felt like, well, there's still more to be done, there's more money needed, but not only for the global anti-doping programs, but also for the national ones. It's a very logical outcome. We've heard of biathletes most recently boycotting World Cups in Russia, and some of them were in the room with us on that day, on June 4th and 5th. And the athletes are very concerned that sporting organizations are still able to host events in WADA non-compliant countries. That's a huge issue going forward. Boycotting is one way of doing it, but it would be really great if there was, in fact, an inability for non-compliant countries to host, which I believe is now going to be done with the CRC. When you get a lot of athletes like this in a room discussing and exchanging their personal views, you understand that there are large discrepancies between the rigor of some anti-doping agencies and others. And so, of course, WADA is involved in monitoring those, but there also needs to be, the onus needs to be on the national anti-doping bodies as well to routinely update and make sure that their programs are up to date and compliant. The athlete voice is strong, but it can always be stronger. And the forum called on all athletes and athlete representative to publicly express their views, both individually and collectively. And to do that, in public statements, whether it's social media, but make it be known, because I think we are a lot stronger when we're unified than when we all keep those views to ourselves. A topic that was extensively discussed throughout the forum is the idea of meaningful, and I stress the word meaningful, participation of athletes on executive boards and within the governance of sporting organizations, and especially as it pertains to anti-doping rules. And so this was a very important outcome of our forum as well. A little bit like the rigor of the anti-doping agencies worldwide and within each country, we realized that there's always a discrepancy in terms of education, and some athletes in the room didn't even know what the code was or how it works or how it's applied. And some nations do a better job of it than others, but I think there's certainly there's a need for mandatory education to make sure that every year the athletes that are doing their whereabouts, that are doing their ADAMs, would be able to get some type of, quite general, but basic education on anti-doping. Currently, Becky Scott is our chair, the chair of the Athletes Committee. And she's a champion for the athlete cause, as she has been for many, many years. But she needs to have her rights heard around the executive committee table. And this last outcome of ours was a very important one that was overwhelmingly endorsed by all. So all in all, the forum was a great success. The athletes, from what we heard, felt empowered, felt that they were going back to their respective corners of the country, of the world, with a lot more knowledge, a lot more tools to be able to help their counterparts. And going forward, the Athletes Commission, the WADA Athletes Committee, and myself and Becky as co-chairs will be pushing forward the charter to be integrated within the World Anti-Doping Code. There was national news coverage as well as, the typical Olympic sport coverage, whether it was inside the games or around the rings. Thank you very much for your attention.